Last week we talked about language and how it has an impact on a lot of different things. Want to kind of keep on with that theme and talk about language one more time as it impacts our attitudes. Because the language we use can certainly create an us versus them kind of a concept, and it doesn't need to necessarily be related to race and or disability or gender, because whenever we create some group that's not us, then it's them. And when we talk about it as related to disability, there's a tendency to do that disability labels create, oh, those people who are deaf or blind or autistic or whatever, they're them versus us who don't have disabilities. And that's a certain way in which stereotypes can occur, because it's easier to mistreat or otherwise not have high expectations of them than it is of us. Labeling is another issue that is a huge consideration as it relates to disability. Again, there's lots of research in education and social psychology, and what we know is that how people are labeled or how people are told to think about a person has a huge impact. There's a classic study of saying that blue-eyed kids were smarter than brown-eyed kids, and how the teachers interacted, how the children interacted with them. But what we know is that labels make a difference in how you're treated. And related to that, and I think this is particularly important too, is while the labels are there, what we may not consider is how does that child who is hearing those labels, who's hearing those terms, the descriptions of his or her behavior or looks or condition, whatever, that are said in a derogatory way, how does that affect them? Because again, I would ask you, as listeners, to think about when you were younger, were you ever teased because you were too tall, too short, too fat, too thin, too smart, too dumb, whatever it might be, but that there was some aspect of you over which you had no control, and yet people teased you about it? Do you still remember that as an adult? I would argue that many of us do. And imagine if you're that person with a disability and that is something that you hear on a consistent, ongoing basis. It has an impact on how we think of ourselves. That self-image is a significant concern. And I would like to take now, as we end this particular segment, a moment to have a couple of speakers, again, give you their perception on language and its sense of how it can be used to include them and make them feel part of a group versus having them feel excluded.
Okay, first of all, I want to thank you for acknowledging me as a Black woman. I grew up through social changes and was part of social changes. I know that we do have a philosophy with disability in the science and studies of disability with social justice, but as I share quite often, I've lived social justice. It's not just a theory for me or philosophy. It's been a way of life. You called me, you say, first as a Black woman. As a Black woman, I do appreciate that, because when the language for social change came about, at first I was born, I hate to say this, I'm dating myself, on my birth certificate, it's Negro, and then as I grew and went into high school or whatever, it was Afro-American. And then culturally we came to be identified as Black. And now it's African American. And so I chose, out of the 4 categories, I chose Black because nobody asked me. Society has a way to give you labels and they don't ask you. They decide what's best for you.
The term wheelchair bound, I kind of giggle on that one because I'm not duct taped to this darn thing. I can get around with no problem. The quad thing, that's a label. The para thing, that's a label. I'm not a paraplegic. I have paraplegia, so there's a little difference in terminology there. I think the only 2 terms that really offend me, but again, I tell people if they mention these 2 words and say, hey, you know what, means that you're kind of looking down on me, is gimp or cripple. I think those are horrible words. I don't hear it from too many able-bodied people, but I hear it a lot from disabled people. That's what they use themselves. They call themselves GAMPs or cripples or something. And I'm thinking, you're really just demeaning yourself, because this is not who you are. You just happen to have a disability. And why are you constantly, being self-deprecating? I hope that explains a little bit.
When it comes to language is huge and powerful. Language can change change ideas and everything. I mean, if someone says it once, we don't care. We're not going to jump over. We're not, but if they keep saying it over and over and over, we're going to say, can you not do that, please? Because because there's certain slangs we wouldn't use around, say, certain ethnic groups, certain women. I mean, we wouldn't use those. I mean, why would it be any different? If you expect that standard for you, why would it not go to another group or another person with a disability?
We'd just like to close this segment with a quick summary to really re-emphasize that idea that attitudes and language are tightly concerned with one another, that attitudes can be influenced with language that creates an us versus them kind of mentality, that that labels people, and that ultimately has a significant impact on the individual's self-esteem if that's what he or she tends to hear from people. So in our next segment, we'll talk a little bit more about the idea of, if you're a person with a disability, what are attitudes and how do they affect you personally, and how do you as an individual respond?